everyone. Welcome to another conversation on the Voice of the Marketeer, wherever you're watching or listening to this from. My guest today is joining us from my local hood, Belgium, and is someone whose work I deeply respect in the marketing ecosystem here. Ilse has been working in the marketing and the e-commerce space for a little under 2 decades now. In the past 6 years alone, she has focused exclusively on assisting several e-commerce companies to grow and scale through her role as a freelance CMO. In addition to her professional life, Ilse is also super active in the marketing community here through her position as a board member of the Belgian Association of Marketing, with her work in diversity and inclusion, and by sharing all of her expertise through her marketing newsletter called MarketingMail. Ilse, it's an absolute pleasure for you to be here and to make the time to speak with me.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
So obviously your career is an amazing 2 decade journey, right? So I do want to first of all trace it all the way back to the very beginning, perhaps, just to understand what drew you to marketing in the very first place. And from there, how did you go about finding your niche, if I may, within e-commerce?
Yeah. Well, to be very honest, I wasn't attracted to marketing at all during my studies. So I started studying language and then quit studying language because I thought it was reading books and writing poetry, but it was actually very technical. So I decided to switch completely to communication sciences. And I had a few marketing courses, which, to be very honest, I very much disliked. And I remember saying to a fellow student, if I end up in marketing, you can laugh at me because I despise this course. Then started working and somehow ended up in a marketing role at an e-commerce company because the job description was to write copy for product pages. So you can see there was a language aspect. So yeah, I ended up in marketing and never actually looked back. And then afterwards realized the irony of it all, I guess. Yeah. And then the e-commerce part, I started working in e-commerce quite early in my career, writing product descriptions for a small e-commerce business and then expanding into doing more and more for the very small business. But I realized only quite recently, to be very honest, looking back, that that's my actual niche. It never was very clear building the career or something. That was never a very active thing. It was, looking back that I realized, oh, I built myself a little corner in this universe somehow. Yeah.
That's interesting because I think you always end up connecting the dots looking backwards.
Hindsight. Yeah, very much. Yeah.
So obviously the most top of mind question for me, given I'm speaking to you, Ilse, is just knowing the e-commerce industry today. Like, I mean, it's literally a place for me where trends and shifts and just changes happen at breakneck speed. But what, in your opinion, are some of those e-commerce shifts that we're likely to witness in the next, say, 2 to 3 years?
Ooh, that's a really, really good question. That's a really good question. And I'd say it depends a little bit on the industry as well. Like, you see different industries shifting at different paces. Like, for example, if you look at e-commerce and online retail, the B2B side of it is still very far behind. So just getting to do their transactions online is for them already a big step. But in general, there's the whole technology disruption coming together. And since e-commerce is such a technology-driven space, of course, whatever happens in the technological realm, so any advancements around AI, for example, social media that's just popping off, is heavily impacting e-commerce and will have its repercussions as well. What I'm seeing, for example, now, the company that I work for now, that I find super fascinating, is everything around social commerce and live shopping, for example, which was, to be very honest, quite new to me. Like, I was seeing stuff happen in the States and in the East, for example, but this is like the first project where they're really where there's room to dive into it and play with it. There's a huge space, so that's definitely a very interesting one as well. So yeah, I think there's lots that's going to happen. Not sure if the next 2 or 3 years are going to be super disruptive. But on the other hand, yeah, e-commerce is ready for it. I was talking to someone last week and I said, it's actually kind of crazy that I've been working in the space for 15 years and people still go to a URL to add a product to their basket and then go through a very complicated form that tells you your address isn't right to then make a payment. And it's in 15 years, not much has changed to that process, which is actually very strange to think about, because I think we have technology to be much more seamless and integrated when it comes to retail. So yeah, please let disruption come. We're ready for it.
Touche. So, and maybe speaking about change itself, right? I think when it comes to disruption, marketing has been in the talks for a while, irrespective of whether it's e-commerce or any other industry. But where do you think marketers in the whole e-commerce sphere will see the biggest change?
I think there's a big change coming for everything related to data. Of course, yeah, everything with cookieless, first-party data, attribution, that's definitely a huge challenge where I see very few companies actually being ready or knowing what to do or having control. So that's a huge challenge. It also requires a specific skill set and quite some knowledge to make sure that whatever you build it right. So that's a challenge or a change that's coming. Because yeah, 15 years ago, you put Google Analytics, no one asked any questions. There were email addresses, IP addresses, whatever. No one actually cared. So that's definitely quite a big one. And another one is definitely everything related to websites and content and the way that AI is involved there. So yeah, my first job was writing copy for product pages. I don't think that's a job that will exist in a few, I was going to say years, but I'm wondering if it might be months, just because of, yeah, all the tools that are now getting available to just produce content. Now, of course, mass content of low quality is not that great, so we need to find a way to make sure it's actually qualitative. But yeah, that's definitely going to change as well.
Right. So maybe something I want to like really double down on in this conversation is your experience as a freelance CMO for the past many years, Ilse. And I think you've probably also seen the breadth of clients and projects in that respect, right? In terms of the diversity of work you've done. How do you today like really approach the process of selecting a client opportunity or a project that comes your way? And on that point, how do you also make sure that it kind of aligns to a larger picture for you as CMO?
Good question. Because I do say no quite a lot. And it's hard to explain. I don't have like a fixed checklist. And it's also different. Like on a very broad scale, I like to make sure that I can have impact for the company and the company can have impact for me, so that we can kind of both learn from each other in a way where I feel like, okay, I can bring something to the table to help you find growth again or whatever they're looking. 99% of the time it's looking for growth. But also vice versa, where I'm looking for something that I can add to my skill set. Like, for example, now I get to dip my toe into social commerce a lot more than before. A previous client gave me a really fresh perspective on everything around customer centricity. So I don't like to repeat myself, which is hard as a consultant. So I'm always looking for new things to learn as well. That's definitely, yeah, that's an important one.
Okay, interesting. And maybe can you tell me a little bit more about, when you're selecting a project and say you've signed off with a client, what are, say, a couple of things that you do in your first week with them, like that are almost like non-negotiable for you to be able to set that right pace and the tone of working together and making sure that this is truly impactful both ways?
Yeah. When I've already started the project, you mean like the first week?
Yes.
Two things. I ask access to all of the data and I talk to everyone in the team. Because for me, those are kind of like the two pillars in marketing as well. There's the numbers and there's the people. So I like to get a really good view of both of those sides to see what's missing, both in data and people, what do they need, and to try and connect already a little bit of the dots and get a full picture. That would definitely be my first week. Yeah.
Interesting. And do you today have any specific marketing frameworks that you really follow to the T, especially within the e-commerce sphere? Because there's a lot of things that change, but also a lot that stays the same. So
Yeah.
I think for people like yourself who've been in this industry long enough, I'm sure you have certain methodologies / frameworks that you do follow,
Mhm.
irrespective of the nature, size, business, what have you,
Yeah.
right? So can you maybe speak to me a little bit about some of that?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure if it has a name. Maybe I should trademark it, or no. It's not that special either. But I don't have a name to put on it. But what I tend to do is a lot of businesses, they look at their results in terms of revenue channels, products sold, etc. And what I find really helpful is to try and make the switch to a customer level. Like, how many customers do you have? How many times do they come back? How many have bought with you in the past 12 months? How much is customer worth? And then, of course, afterwards, there's a whole exercise of how do they find you, etc. But to me, it gives a very different view on how to drive a business forward, rather than we should spend more on this channel because there's this much revenue coming out of it. It's rather, this is a very important category of customers that you should get closer to, which is a very different mindset, because one is very much around the product and the other one is very much based around the client. And I tend to find that the client view leads to better messaging, better campaigns, and better results in general. And it's a shift that I like to make in the companies where I start working, because they don't naturally tend to do that.
And how do you then make sure that some of your frameworks are also aligning with their sort of brand strategy and the cohesiveness around building the brand that they have probably built over the years? But also with you coming in and trying to bring your expertise, how do you make sure that the whole system is more seamless and is coming together?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. It's all about aligning on the different levels, because having a customer view or a channel view, but in the end, you're talking about the same revenue and the same results, right? So you can go to your CFO and budget based on actual numbers. It's the breakdown for the marketing team that's a little different, and that drives customer interaction versus putting a product on a shelf, which is a very different mindset, right? But as long as you align on the overall arch, you can plug it into any framework or company or budget or vision, if that makes any sense.
It does. And maybe just to underscore something you briefly touched upon, how do you actually ensure that there's also a clear alignment with some of your ideas that you bring in with, say, the management or the CEO, and just make sure that they're all on the same page as you in terms of, okay, this is the plan of action. Here's where we're going, and we're going to go from there. How do you go about that?
This is a really good question. I like to test a little bit before I take on a project. Like when you meet people and when you discover the company and you're kind of finding out about each other, it's not that I'm going to be difficult, but I just like to see how they deal with a little bit of pushback. Like, if I ask you a critical question, how do you react? Like, are you open to my input? I don't say you have to agree with me all the time. Please don't, because I like pushback as well. But if someone responds with fear or if someone actually enjoys it, that's super important for me to know, because that also defines how you work together. And even in working together, people don't need to agree with me. I'm not there to be, well, I'm there to be right in theory, but I think driving progress and change comes from interaction and communication and exchanging opinions, rather than one person being right and telling the whole company to go in a certain direction, because I don't think that would be healthy. So it's on the communication and then sensing how someone deals with a bit of discussion, because it's a warm and friendly thing. It's not a battle. But yeah, important to sense that one, definitely.
Right. And can you also tell me a little bit about, just looking at the broader e-commerce industry, let's say Benelux for now. What are some of the mistakes that you see e-commerce marketers making? And this is not directly just about the clients you're working with, but even other e-commerce companies. And I'm sure you're somebody who keeps an eye out on everybody's marketing
Mhm.
trends and strategies. So can you tell me some mistakes that you see that people are making and that could be done well better?
Oh, it's a really good question. I think, I don't know if mistakes is the right word. What I think in general is that I see e-commerce companies maybe not diversify enough. Like, I often see them finding one or two channels again that work really well, and then they just keep dumping budget into that one channel until it's completely depleted, right? So for example, okay, Google Ads works for me. I'm going to put all of my eggs into that basket and just get all of the revenue that I can. Well, yeah, of course, yeah, do what works, find what works and focus on it. But don't forget other opportunities, because I think it limits you in your growth. I think it's a very short-term way of thinking as well. So yeah, diversifying is a big one also, because if anything were to happen, if Google one day changes a policy or something technical goes wrong, of course you're very, very fragile at that moment, and you're missing other axes of growth if you don't play around with other channels or even just your brand, for example. That's also diversifying, putting some stuff on brand versus just a short-term revenue. So yeah, diversifying and then playing around is really a big one. Yeah.
And is there a one untapped channel, in your opinion, that marketers haven't leveraged enough in the e-commerce space today?
Oof, I'm gonna give a very annoying marketing answer. It depends. I think it really depends. On the other hand, I saw a study from Bcom, so BCommerce, which is the union of e-commerce in Belgium, that said that we're really not present enough in marketplaces, which is a really good channel to also go and find an international audience quite easily. And it's the way that international audiences are also coming and reaching Belgian customers, so that Belgian e-commerce specifically is not performing well enough and losing a lot of potential on that one. So I would say that's maybe got some untapped potential in general.
I do want to talk about your marketing newsletter a little bit, because
Yeah.
it's suffice to say that it's quite popular around here, and I think there is also a ton of gold nuggets in there. But tell me, when you started Marketing Mail back in the day, what was your idea behind it, and where do you see the whole newsletter space also going today? Because let's just look at LinkedIn today, right? I
Yeah.
think we are going at a pace of maybe one newsletter on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis these days. So it's one thing is obviously being consistent about sharing your ideas, structuring content, putting creativity out there. But the other is also how do you stand out per se in a sea of so many newsletters being published on a
Yeah.
weekly or a bi-weekly basis, right? So can you talk to me a little bit about Marketing Mail, and how that started and where that's headed
Yeah.
in the coming days?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Marketing Mail, my own newsletter, there's zero strategy behind it. There's zero vision. There's zero goals. It's just because I love writing and I love sharing. Well, or yeah, if I find interesting stuff, my husband's not a marketeer, so I can't annoy him with it. So I was like, I'll just go and annoy other people with it. So it's a pure envie, they say in French, or hosting. It's just something that I really like doing. I like writing. And it's got no objective. Like, there's no, yeah, I don't aim to get anything out of it. There's also no structure. I write one when I have time and I want to write one. So there's no pressure either, which makes it, yeah, it's one of my favorite side projects to just sit down and assemble all of the info that I personally think is cool and nice to read. But it's true that in general, newsletters, I could probably do something more interesting with it. Like I could make it into a professional vehicle for selling my services or gain whatever notoriety. But that's not the way I see my own newsletter. But I think it's a very powerful tool. I very much believe in maybe it's like karma, like you get what you give, and so you just give because that means reciprocity will happen as well. And I also think it's very important to give back to the community and share what you think is interesting. So yeah, it's pure pleasure and joy for me.
Wonderful. And is there one or a combination of newsletters that you follow a lot today, like either through the writing or the joy of like sharing information, but also because they share some incredible info on their newsletters?
I follow so many. It's kind of it's actually too much. I need to do a heavy cleanup also because my interests evolve over time. But if you want, I can get you like a list of my top 3 or something that you can add in the show notes or whatever. But yeah, I would need to take a look to cite some specific ones because there's too much.
I'd love that. Yes, for sure. Please.
Yeah.
I'd love to look at the show notes. But is there one name that pops on the top of your mind right now?
He doesn't have a newsletter, and I don't know if I agree to all of his theories and frameworks, but Mark Ritson, as a marketeer, I personally like, just because he does not care. He does not care. He does not care what you think. He just gives his opinion, and he's like, I'll just give you my opinion. You can take it, whatever, but he does not care. And I like that. Well, of course, always stay respectful to others, but having the freedom to just say, this is what I feel, and being able to express it in a really, he writes very well as well, so expressing it in a really good way, yeah, that's quite cool. And he says interesting things. Not sure if it's always right, but at least it's most of the time it's interesting.
Okay, well, I'll take a note of that for sure. And yes, when you have a moment, if you send me other names, I'd love to add them to show notes. I'm sure people would find them interesting. So maybe just sort of pivoting a little bit into a topic that I'm super passionate about, and I know you are as well, which is D&I. But I think you are massively advocating D&I in the marketing realm in Belgium, thanks to your work with with the think tank of Belgian Association of Marketing. Can you tell me a little bit more about the work that you do there, and also maybe if you could share some initiatives that you've implemented there through your position as a board member, and maybe speak to the impact it has had so far?
Yeah, the captain of the think tank around D&I at BAM. And it's basically a group of people who are passionate about diversity in marketing. What that means exactly is that we gather to discuss the état de lieu, how our industry is actually doing, and try to come up with initiatives to make it more diverse and inclusive. The initiatives, they're quite widespread. So first of all, there's all of the activities of the BAM organization. There's a congress, there's member days. So we try to make sure that we provide interesting topics and speakers and make sure that the lineup is inclusive as well. So we definitely try and work on those initiatives. There's trainings as well where we give a lot of input. And then besides that, we try to work on a couple layers. First of all, is still awareness. We need to start still on the awareness level, because a lot of people are, yeah, but there's no, what's the issue? There's no issue. Well, yes, there's an issue. There's still underrepresentation. There's still stereotypes. So yes, there is an issue. So we definitely still need to start there. And one concrete thing that we've built, which I'm personally very proud of, is our diversity barometer, we call it. We made it together with Nono. It's a startup that works with AI to help detect, in commercials in this case, help detect some personality traits, for example, gender, age, ethnicity, So what we do is every quarter we kind of scan I think the 1,000 or maybe even 5,000 most played Belgian commercials, and we try and measure how diverse they actually are when we compare to the population, etc. And it shows very much that there's still need for more representation and more inclusion. Like, for example, you see still men driving the car in the commercial, and if it's a woman with kids on the back seat. So those kinds of things come up, and I'm very happy that we can show, backed up with data, that there's still work that needs to be done. So yeah, that's just one example of what we try to do.
It's so interesting you say this because just last week I had a chat with Johan, and he showed me what No No actually looks like and the incredible work and the research, years of research he's put behind it. So
Yeah,
I fully like concur with you. I think it's and the whole idea of the barometer, it just makes me smile even more because I think it's something that's been missing in the system for a while, and it feels like a little reality check to
exactly.
so many of us.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you say this because I want to know your opinion, Ilse, since you're so close to this topic. What is the biggest problem with diversity in marketing today? Is it lack of representation, or is it extreme stereotyping, or is it both?
I think it's both, and I think the two are very much connected. Very much connected, and on multiple levels, and not just in the way that things are expressed, like externally in the commercials, for example, that we're able to measure, but also in the way that organizations work internally and the ways that the teams are constructed and the ways that hiring is done, which makes it a huge web of small little knots to try and detangle, because it's all connected. Because internally as well, representation and stereotyping is very present, and that of course reflects to any marketing that finds its way to the outside world. So it's a complicated matter, to be very honest. And I don't think there's one root cause. I don't think there's one big issue. Just like diversity is like super diversity, there's not one axis of diversity that's more important to work on than the other. Is it gender? Is it age? Is it ethnicity? It's everything. Yeah, which makes it very interesting as a field, but also very, very complex to move the needle because it's so dense and tight together.
And if we take what you just said and sort of trace that back to the e-commerce space, and marketing that's happening from a brand perspective, what are some of your tips and say tactics that obviously have worked very well for you, but something that you can share to other marketeers in terms of how they can be super mindful in their strategies to ensure that there is actual genuine inclusivity that
Yeah.
reflects the brand in their campaigns, in their outreach, whether on social, advertising, what have you?
Yeah. Um, I'd have two main tips, I think. The first one is to know and talk to your customer. So know who your customer is. And you can have multiple types of customers, of course, but know who they are and then actually talk to them. Because if you're not part of their world, at least have a conversation about it. And try and see, for example, we have like the project I'm working on right now, we sell Advent calendars, but this year is the first year that we sold Ramadan calendars as well. So every day of the Ramadan, you get to open and you have like a suite, which is a very new thing for us to market. And we don't have anyone in our team that follows Ramadan either. So I think it's key to try and talk to people who do and check with them, like, okay, but what does this product mean for you, etc., etc. So yeah, talk to your customer. And then the second one is not be afraid to make mistakes, because you will. I mean, you very well might at some point say something that's not necessarily correct or appreciated, or just because I am me, you're you, so you can never really align with everyone. But as long as everyone's respectful and means well, and you're open again to discuss and communicate about it, yeah, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to, for example, sell a Ramadan calendar. Just be respectful and communicate well.
Tell me this, Ilse, is there one specific career moment, either with one of your organizations in the past, where uh, you weren't really ready for the challenges that the role presented, but you took a leap of faith and you jumped in headfirst anyway? And then in hindsight today, you look back and say, that was the best thing I did to myself
Yeah,
and my career.
100%. Yeah, I very much remember that moment. It was when I had worked for a few smaller companies with really lovely people, but they were, well, it's not that they didn't know what they were doing, but they weren't necessarily very experienced in digital marketing. And I felt that I wanted to learn and that I wanted to learn from someone. So I went looking for a job for a company that was much more mature. I felt like I had the skills, but yeah, it would be a stretch, and I felt worried and I was quite scared, but I did it anyway. And looking back, that was when I started working for New Pharma. Looking back, that was the biggest learning curve of my career, and the best decision I made professionally up until now, I think. Yeah.
Wow. And I mean, obviously, new pharma is so talked about, at
Mhm.
least in the Belgian system, because of the successes the company has seen. What has been the biggest success for you at new pharma as a marketing leader?
Oh, that's actually it's a difficult one to talk about. A difficult one to talk about. It's a bit of a sensitive one. Um, it it was a horrible period, but it was also one that I look back on and I can say I did it well, but it was actually reducing the team size, which well, you build a team based on a certain reality and certain needs of the market, and then comes a point where you kind of look at what's been built over the years and you realize it might not necessarily be what the company needs. And you do your best to put the puzzle and see if people can be like reskilled, or if there's any other teams that need certain profiles. So you really try and make the puzzle fit as well as you can. But at some point, yeah, there's loose pieces in the puzzle and you have to let people go. And it was quite a lot. And it was a really hard process. But looking back, I was able to do it where everyone understood the exercise. Of course, people weren't happy to leave the company, but at least there was understanding. And the people that stayed also stayed because they also understood. So I'm not saying I'm proud of well, you cannot say you're proud of letting people go. But looking back at the way that it was done, I think it went the best it could go. And it had a huge impact on the company and also on the people in the end, positively, because it was also people who I truly believed could do better elsewhere. And they all did as well. So yeah, I would say that one.
How does Ilse today like really keep herself centered, but also on top of everything that's happening in marketing around her? Like in terms of, because you advise a lot of organizations. You also are an active advocate in a lot of local marketing circles here. But I think for someone like you, it might be even more pertinent for you to stay informed, but also just constantly consuming info, consuming content, bouncing off ideas, and all of that, right? How do you do that today?
Yeah. Huh, I don't know. If I give the impression of having full control, I don't. But as a freelancer, I never fill 5 days a week with project or client work. I make sure that I keep time open to consume content and to go through my newsletters. Of course, not all and not every week, but I keep space. I keep space to consume and feed the brain, which I wouldn't be able to do if I were to work full time 5 days a week as an employee somewhere. So as a freelancer, that's definitely a block that I fill in my calendar, which I think is a major thing. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're almost down to the time I had in mind, Ilse, but
Mhm.
before we wrap it up, any closing thoughts?
Any closing thoughts? Oh my. Any closing thoughts? I think for anyone working in marketing, or anywhere, don't be afraid to stretch and jump, and just always stay respectful. You'll get far.